Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dissident Dispatch at The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. And on today's show, we are going to talk about what I'm sure is a fairly contentious topic, and that is whether or not our politicians, our government should be in any way restricting speech or banning speech on campuses or really anywhere that we don't like. Not the places, but the speech. Before I get into the topic, which is about Governor Ron DeSantis's latest move to ban Students for Justice in Palestine from Florida campuses, I would ask you to please consider subscribing to the channel if you're interested in content about our education crisis in America. If you're not already subscribed, check if your subscription is still working too, because I've had some people tell me that they've gotten unsubscribed. And please like and share this broadcast so other people can benefit from, or even just critique what I'm offering here. So I want to also start by saying that this was a fairly difficult thing for me to even think about discussing with you all, because initially I was of a mind that we should stop these protest groups on campuses from holding their protests. If you've seen the news reports, you've seen them marching on campuses, you've seen them waving Palestinian flags, holding up signs that say "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And that is no less than a call for genocide, at least by, their definition of the term, what it means, from the river to the sea, free of Jews. And I was on board with, they need to stop supporting these organizations. And by supporting, I meant financially supporting them, allowing them the use of university resources, classrooms, facilities, even a space to gather and march, and so on. And I even worked on an article and a petition and everything to get University of North Carolina Board of Governors to get rid of them from North Carolina campuses. And on the one hand, I stand by that as being, hey, they're calling for these things, and why should they use taxpayer funded resources? But after careful consideration and thinking about it over the weekend and reading about what Ron DeSantis did, and even reading the letter that his system chancellor wrote to the university presidents, as well as the statement from fire.org, which defends free speech on campus, I've had a change of heart. It is not because I in any way support what Students for Justice in Palestine are saying. I think anyone who knows me, or even a little, knows that I think they're an absolutely reprehensible organization. I absolutely do believe that they get some financing from groups that also finance Hamas. I do believe that they are at least providing, moral support for what Hamas is doing, which is horrendous. And I think there could come a time when their speech crosses over into incitement, at which time I want to make myself very, very clear. If what they do becomes aggressive and violent, as it did on the campus of Cooper Union in New York City, where they chase students into a library and force the students to barricade themselves in for safety and lock the door while they bang on the walls and the windows with sticks, which is very clearly a threat of physical violence, then those individuals involved should be arrested for incitement and or aggressively threatening others with bodily harm. I believe the university should take every steps to remove them from the campus as individuals, because they took those actions individually. Each and every one of them showed up with a stick and behaved in that manner, should be expelled. So I want to make myself very clear that when individuals behave badly and exploit freedom of speech to aggressively intimidate or threaten with physical harm, then the full weight of the university's rules and standards and laws should come down on them, as should any applicable civil statutes. So I don't want there to be any confusion here that when it comes to individual behavior on the part of members of Students for Justice in Palestine, even if there are 100 individuals gathered in one place, when they are violating the laws that protect our civil liberties and protect the other students on the campus, they need to be punished. So there should be no contradiction there. What my concern is with policies that outright ban an organization or a group or a club from the campus altogether and from expressing their views as a group on the campus. I think that's a dangerous precedent to set. Having said that, I only say that because I defend freedom of speech. So the idea of freedom of speech, the principle of freedom of speech. But Ron DeSantis is correct that in his capacity as governor, he has authority by virtue of the fact that the university system is a state-run system. It's a socialist system. He has the authority to make rules, change rules, direct his chancellor to do things. And what I'm here to tell you is that it's that authority that's the problem, as much as whatever SJP is saying. In fact, I would argue that what SJP is saying and the reason they are able to attract the following they're able to attract on our campuses is precisely because we have and have had for well over 100 years a socialist education system. We have developed in this country and upheld the premise that a group can speak for all and that there's such a thing as the people and that somebody somewhere in a position of power can dictate what is the good for the people. Believe it or not, that is the principle from which they draw their power. If we had a truly free, independent system, private system, where the individuals who are members of SJP had to pay their own way and the schools had to support their own existence, not through any subsidized loans or grants, just from tuition, if they had to justify their existence to each and every individual student and family, I maintain that ideas like those propagated by SJP and other collectivist, tribalist, decolonizer, critical theory pushing organizations, any kind of neo-Marxist organization would not make it. They'd fall apart. That's my core argument. And so what I want to do today, I've put together a presentation. First, let me just share, for those, if you're just joining, we're talking about this. This is Ron DeSantis. He ordered the state universities to disband pro-Palestinian student groups, saying it backs Hamas. Well, it does back Hamas with words. And so they're taking this extraordinary step. And he told the chancellor to send a letter. The letter is this letter. And this letter essentially claims that the group, in their words, in other words, the Students for Justice in Palestine, that they are part of something called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, because they are using the same verbiage. They have distributed a toolkit, and they are claiming now that because what they're saying is that Palestinian students in exile are part of this movement, not in solidarity with this movement. That was what they said when they released the toolkit, they being Students for Justice in Palestine. They said with their words, we are part of this movement. They didn't do anything. They said they were. Again, we could debate all day long whether, what they're saying is good, bad, or indifferent. Obviously, I think it's horrendous to even say such a thing. However, this is the United States of America. And so, as a consequence, they're saying it's a felony under Florida law to knowingly provide material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization. Here, National SJP, that National is who distributed the toolkits to the Florida chapters. The toolkit is a printed document. And they're saying here they've affirmatively identified as part of Operation Alexa Flood a terrorist-led attack. Well, a terrorist-led attack is an attack. It's not a bunch of words in a document distributed on a campus. And so they are saying that based on their support of terrorism and consultation with Governor DeSantis, the student chapters must be deactivated. So my argument is, if it's a felony to knowingly provide material support, bring those who distributed the toolkit locally in Florida up on felony charges. If you really believe that they have committed a felony under Florida law, then that's actionable. Take action. Disbanding them from the campus, if you genuinely believe they're committing a felony in Florida, doesn't stop them from continuing to commit a felony, does it? So they go a block off campus to another location and continue to commit a felony, if that's what you genuinely believe. If, on the other hand, you don't have any evidence that a felony has been committed, if it's the distribution of words on paper to students on a campus where freedom of speech is supposed to be protected, it's a pretty extraordinary claim. Again, he can do this, though, because he is the boss of the system, because it is taxpayer funded and it is therefore a socialist system. So he has lots of leeway. Let's continue on to what FAIR says. This is fire.org. If you're not familiar with it, they defend rights on campus. This is their statement on orders to Florida public universities to de-recognize Students for Justice in Palestine. We must not give politicians more power to suppress free speech. You can think that's squishy. I did too. There'll be people out there who'll tell you that I was writing back and forth with them over the weekend, and we thought, how can they say this and so on? And then I had to give it a lot of thought. And I arrived at the conclusion that they're right. And my bias was showing. I am biased against SJP. I obviously support Israel. I think that Hamas is all bad things, completely evil. But unfortunately, I prize free speech, and I don't want to allow this group, Students for Justice in Palestine, to use the fact that it is a socialist system, which they like, by the way. Islamism is communism, to further erode our freedoms. That's a win for them. And I'll explain more on that in a moment. But they said the government cannot force public colleges to de-recognize Students for Justice in Palestine chapters. That's just what State University System of Florida Chancellor Ray Rodriguez reportedly, at the direction of Governor Ron DeSantis, is trying to do. There is no indication from the chancellor's letter that any action from Florida's Students for Justice in Palestine groups went beyond expression fully protected by the First Amendment. That's the key. No action. And to say it's a felony to give material support, you now have to back that up with evidence. Even these students are entitled to due process. Yes, they are. FIRE believes higher education can only fulfill its important missions, et cetera, and so forth. And just to be fair, because I don't want you to indict FAIR and say, not FAIR, FIRE, and say that they're somehow biased. It's really important to note they are even-handed. Tear down censorship, not posters. They are also saying it is absolutely inappropriate censorship to allow students to tear down the posters of the missing hostages. So to the extent that this is happening on American college campuses, they need to be punished. They are engaging in censorship, the students. And when the universities and the colleges do not back up the other students who are not ripping down posters, they have a right to read the posters. They have a right to post the posters. That is a violation of their free speech rights. So they're consistent. And when I saw these two things and I started to think about it, I really had to change my point of view on this. So having said all that, I want to go back to what I said about how it's a socialist system and that makes this possible. And that DeSantis is correct, or at least right within his authority to do this, presiding over a state-run system. But the problem is, and this is why I say it would be a win for SJP. Right now, it's a Republican governor in the state of Florida doing this, and we know he's pro-Israel, and many of us agree with his particular point of view on this conflict. What happens when there's a lawsuit? Because there will be a lawsuit. I believe there already is a lawsuit, and they have to pony up. There are a few potential outcomes. One, the taxpayers could end up being on the hook for damages if they find for SJP. The university could decide to settle by saying all such interest groups will be removed from the campus to be even handed. Remember, equality under the law. And suddenly you might find that Stand With Us, a pro Zionist organization, pro Israel organization, Camera on Campus, another one, and there are numerous others, might be banned from the campuses as well. Because if you're going to ban one, and they claim, because you say it's threatening, because you say it offends others, because it intimidates others, etc. How do you argue that you shouldn't ban the others? And if a complaint comes in that they feel the same way about the pro-Israel groups, and this has happened on campuses, well, I guess we're going to ban all the flags, or I guess we're going to ban all the things. And some people might say, oh, well, that's good. That would be an improvement because at least the bad guys can't talk. You do understand this is a taxpayer funded institution. Your taxes are going to that. You're going to keep restricting speech until what are people permitted to say? It just goes back and forth on the basis of which group votes or sues harder than the other because it is taxpayer funded. Now, compare and contrast that with private institutions. If the Florida universities were completely private, 100%, everybody had to pay for it on their own. They wouldn't be able to do this. They wouldn't be able to do this. First of all, most of the students there wouldn't have the funds to waste on this kind of activity. Or if school were more affordable, which I believe it would be, then you would have people going to school, ideally to get an education, paying for it out of their own pocket, not leveraging taxpayer money to go and be activists. It would be their own investment. Is that really what you want to spend 4 years of your life and your own money doing? Going to a college campus and being an activist? It's a lot of money. Even if it were half the price, it's still a lot of money. But because you can borrow it with a guaranteed loan from the government and grants and other things, and by the way, professors get these too, your motivation to use your college education for your own individual benefit, it's a little different, isn't it? Someone else is paying the bill. And you might say, well, they have to pay those loans back. Do they? Or is it possible that these loans might be paid off by some of the same people sending their donations to Students for Justice in Palestine? And they might do that still on a private campus, but you're decentralizing the risk. People get wind of the fact that this private campus over here has this kind of activity going on, and they can choose not to go there. One of the reasons a lot of people currently go to a state school is it's cheaper because it's subsidized. Well, if you open it up to a free market, then all the schools would have to compete with each other, and you wouldn't have the state school being the top contender where everybody's going to gather and do their activism subsidized by the taxpayers and exposed to the political process of, I want this, I want that. Okay, you have nothing, or you have what I say you can have. So it is a socialist system. It's not, it might become one. It is one. And it always has been one. And it is one from K through all the way. There is no element of our education right now, unless you're talking about Hillsdale College or possibly one of 2 or 3 other completely private institutions, that is completely private, that doesn't even take students who are getting government loans. They're taking maybe private loans through a bank or something, but they don't get money from the government, not a cent. So what goes on their campus goes on their campus. It doesn't really spread unless they can come up with the money to have more campuses. And that may be why they don't have more Hillsdale colleges, because they're competing with your tax dollars. They're competing with a giant honeypot of money that's been coerced away from you. It's always going to be larger than whatever the private individuals are going to come up with. So, because they can just put a gun to your head and take more and take more and take more. And remember too that the state controls every aspect of that school. It's accreditation, whether it has it or not. And that apparently matters to some people. I don't know. They can actually close a school, by the way, if they want to a college. So they control that. They control the credentialing process for professors. They control the ed schools as well, and what they teach and are allowed to teach, and what makes you a professor or not a professor. They control, even getting the land to have a school, all the permits involved with that. The government controls every single aspect of it. So, I mean, yes, he's stepping in and doing this thing, but would you feel as sanguine about it if it were a Democrat banning the Israel groups? Because a group of Palestinian students said they felt intimidated, or even because a tiny handful of pro-Israel students behaved very, very badly. Let's say it happened. Okay. It hasn't happened and it's not likely to happen. Yes, I understand the differences at the moment, but let's just say, how would you feel then about everyone being banned from these groups? So you see the problem. So what I've done is I've put together also a presentation to explain that in this case, Ron DeSantis is sort of an example of how we're stuck in terms of education. We are stuck because even if, let's say he's, a good man trying to do a good thing. I'm not, please don't hear me impugning his motives or saying he's a bad guy or anything. This is nothing personal against Ron DeSantis. And I'm not doing anything about his candidacy here. This is strictly, he's the governor right now. He's a Republican governor. This is what he's doing. He's pro-Israel, et cetera. If the tides turn or another person is there, they could do something completely different you might not like. And that's because of state power. So leaving that aside, we're stuck because of the socialist system. And my argument is the socialists have won. So the only question is, will we continue to accept defeat as a population? Will we continue to put ourselves in positions where people with terrible, terrible ideas can come to our system of education, can intrude into the education of our youth? And then we have to decide between sacrificing our freedoms to stop them or just letting them go, letting them continue to propagate their bad ideas. And that's what the socialist system forces us to do. That's exactly what it forces us to do. So what I've done here is I've thought about it and realized that rights only exist at the individual level. Collectives don't have rights. There is no the people. DeSantis cannot protect individuals from within a collectivist socialist system. He can ban SJP from the campus, and there will still be people who go and want to terrorize the Jewish students on the campus outside of SJP. What will he have accomplished? Except to now put a situation, put a precedent out there that this can happen and other groups can be banned by government authority. People are unwilling to give up this system, usually because they're afraid that individuals will behave badly. So we talk about rights existing at the individual level, and there's inevitably somebody, right or left, who's going to say, well, but immorality will dominate. If we allow this kind of freedom, people will do bad things. I talked about it last week on the show about John Oliver, where he was terrified that parents left to our own devices without government oversight, without a background check, will abuse our children while homeschooling. This bad things will happen without government telling us not to do it. So I think that people on both sides of the political aisle are very reluctant to call this what it is, a socialist system, because on some level, they either like or benefit from the system. And the thing I think people like the most is they have this notion that it will protect them from immoral people, from bad people. On the left, the bad people teaching their kids views about God I don't like. They're teaching them about Christianity, and I don't like that. So we have government in place, and then we can't have that in our schools because individuals will do things badly. And then on the other hand, on the right, you have people saying, well, we can't have people teaching their children about Marxism. We can't have people teaching their children that that there's no God or whatever. People will prefer to tell other people what to teach their kids and what they should and shouldn't think because they're afraid. If one person thinks it, then so many other people will think it, and so on and so on. And I think there's this sense that if we keep this system, but just if we control it, if the good guys control it, whichever one thinks they're the good guys, which is, both, right? If we can just control it, then our good ideas will be propagated and everything will be fine. But it doesn't work that way, does it? Today it's you, tomorrow it's someone else. And the only way really to make morality work, as I said, is to decentralize that authority and stick to individual rights. You decentralize risk and you avoid punishing the innocent by violating their rights preemptively. They haven't done anything. I'll give you another real world example to illustrate this. We gave a prohibition, thank goodness. It didn't work, and people can drink alcohol. We have literally allowed people to drink themselves to death in America. But people also drink in moderation. There are businesses that are built on that, and people enjoy their lives and have wine with their dinner and so on. And the vast, vast majority of people do not abuse alcohol and do not drink themselves to death and do not drive drunk. And we punish people when they put others at risk when they drink too much. But they're permitted to drink. But we don't permit people to use drugs. Now, I consider and tell you, I think it's absolutely immoral to use drugs. You're hurting yourself, you're hurting your family, and you probably are going to end up hurting other people as well. But I don't know that for sure. You might not. You might not. And since drugs is a pretty wide category, I'm not comfortable giving the government the authority to tell you what you can and cannot do, because then at some point they might decide something is a drug they don't want me to take that I need. There are actual pain sufferers who cannot get their hands on their pain medications because the government tells them they might abuse it. So this is sort of two sides of, when somebody says you're going to do something immoral and they win, there's a law that you can't get hold of your pain medication. And when people say, not our business, alcohol is legal. I personally think the greatest degree of morality in terms of alcohol use has come from it being legal. Your mileage may vary. So let me lead in with this quote from Isabel Patterson from God and the God of the Machine, 1943. Every politically controlled educational system will inculcate the doctrine of state supremacy sooner or later. Once that doctrine has been accepted, it becomes the life of the citizen. It has had his body, property, and mind in its clutches from infancy. An octopus would sooner release its prey. A tax-supported compulsory education system is the complete model of the totalitarian state. I agree with her. I obviously agree with her because I am a big proponent of abolition of the public school system and of all public education, because I do believe it not only will, she wrote this in 1943, sorry, it has. It has. Look at SJP. What is SJP? It's a tribalist collectivist organization, and it has a lot of support right now. Where did the students, most of whom are not Arabs, most of whom are not Muslim, most of whom have never set foot in the Middle East and don't know any of the history of the region, why are they getting so much support? Because they have inculcated the doctrine of state supremacy, the idea that the collective is more important than any individual rights. And then they've also taught other collectivist ideas like critical theory and these postmodern notions of oppressor oppressed narratives, power binaries, and things like that. So all they have to do is cast a group that they don't like as an oppressor, demand the decolonization of that oppressor, and they attract lots of followers because that's what's been inculcated into the student body. But it could not have been without a state system, because long ago, when this first reared its ugly head, parents would have said, if it was a private school. This was being done, parents would have said, I'm out. I'm going to go to the school across town that doesn't do this, because the school across town would have had the freedom to not do this. So today it's DeSantis, tomorrow it's Newsom. When the states control the schools, or the money used to pay for the schools, like the lending program, as well as all that stuff I mentioned, it's great when you like them, not so great when you don't. Um, Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read, and I think it's important. It's going to take some time to get through this, but it's very important for you to hear this. This is Live Not by Lies, and I think it really is the foundation of this entire show. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. At one time, we dared not even whisper. Now we write and read samizdat, and sometimes when we gather in the smoking room of the Science Institute, we complain frankly to one another. What kind of tricks are they playing on us, and where are they dragging us? How often have you heard people lately talk about this as a conspiracy, the WEF, and this and that? And it's true. I'm not mocking. It's true. We have people now, I talk to people every day who say, where are they dragging us? There is gratuitous boasting of cosmic achievements while poverty and destruction exist at home, propping up remote uncivilized regimes, fanning up civil war. Sound familiar? And we recklessly fostered Mao Zedong at our expense. Well, who are we fostering now? At our expense, right here at home. Student activists who resemble little red armies, the little red army, very much. And we shall be the ones sent to war against him, them, could be right here on our doorstep. And we will have to go. Is there any way out? They put anybody they want on trial and put sane people in asylums. Always they. We are powerless. Didn't our Justice Department refer to parents critical of all of these things as domestic terrorists? And aren't we now hearing in the mental health-ism going on in our schools that parents who question a lot of this might have a problem, might be mentally unwell? That's starting to make the rounds. Things have almost reached rock bottom. A universal spiritual death has already touched us, and a physical death will soon flare up and consume us and our children. But as before, we still smile in a cowardly fashion and mumble with our tongues tied. What can we do to stop it? We haven't the strength. We have been so hopelessly dehumanized that for today's ration of food, sorry, not blood, we're not vampires, food, we are willing to abandon all our principles, our souls, and the efforts of our predecessors, as well as the opportunities for our descendants. Just don't disturb our fragile existence. How many times have I asked people, why don't you at least not perpetuate the lies? Walk away. Don't turn your children over to these liars whom you call liars. And the answer is, I can't. It will be uncomfortable. We lack resolution, pride, and enthusiasm. We don't even fear universal nuclear death, nor do we fear a third world war. Perhaps we can hide in crevices. We just fear acts of civil courage. We're afraid to lag behind the herd and to take one step alone. And suddenly we find ourselves without white bread, heating gas, and a Moscow registration. Or, access to the internet or power or our driver's license, or we get some kind of other social credit problem, can't get a job, etc. What was drummed in our ears at political courses we have now internalized. Live comfortably and all will be well ever after. You cannot escape your environment and social conditions. Existence determines consciousness. This is literally what they're teaching our children. Existence determines consciousness. What does it have to do with us? We cannot do anything about it, but we can. We lie to ourselves to preserve our peace of mind. It's not they who should be blamed, but ourselves. One can object, but cannot imagine what to do. Gags have been stuffed into our mouths. Nobody wants to listen to us, and nobody asks our opinion. How can we force them to listen to us? It is impossible to change their minds. It would be logical to vote them out of office, but there are no elections in our country. That's what they got to. How many of you have ever said, half jokingly, half seriously, sorry, I'm not sure there'll be an election, or I'm not sure there'll be another one after this one, or if this one goes this way, then we probably won't have any others. Many of us are sitting around waiting for that last election like we think it's a distinct possibility. If we're already there, do we need to get to where Solzhenitsyn was? before we start doing what he recommends? Let's continue. In the West, people resort to strikes and protest demonstrations, but we are too downtrodden and it is too horrifying for us. How can one suddenly renounce a job and take to the streets? Other fatal paths tested during the last century by our bitter Russian history are even less suitable for us, and truly we do not need them. Now that the axes have done their work and everything that was sown has sprouted, we can see that the young and presumptuous people who thought they would make our country just and happy through terror, bloody rebellion, and civil war were themselves misled. We are not to that point yet with our young people, our young, presumptuous people who are walking around talking about making the world better, not just the country. And they are now saying things using SJP like by any means necessary. And you might think, well, Deb, then by all means, that's why we should ban them. They are saying these things. And that's exactly why we shouldn't ban them. We don't fight their terrible ideas with silence. No thanks, fathers of enlightenment. Now we know that infamous methods breed infamous results. Let our hands be clean. Is the circle closed? Is there really no way out? Is there only one thing left to do, to wait without taking any action? Maybe something will happen by itself. But it will never happen as long as we daily acknowledge, extol, and strengthen and do not sever ourselves from the most perceptible of its aspects, lies. When violence intrudes into peaceful life, its face glows with self-confidence, as if it were carrying a banner and shouting, "I am violence. Run away. Make way for me. I will crush you." But violence quickly grows old. After only a few years, it loses confidence in itself, and in order to maintain a respectable face, it summons falsehood as its ally. Since violence can conceal itself with nothing except lies, and the lies can be maintained only by violence. Violence does not lay its paw on every shoulder every day. It demands from us only obedience to lies and daily participation in lies. And this submissiveness is the crux of the matter. We know that SJP is lying. We know that Hamas is lying. We know that virtually everything said on college campuses about the history of the Middle East is a lie. But where are the voices coming back to tell the truth? Where are the people countering what they're saying with the truth? Where are these messages? And you might say, well, the media is controlled, etc. You have a voice. I have a voice. Every student on that campus has a voice who disagrees. This is how terrorism works. This is how it works. Even if he's successful in banning SJP from the campus and they leave, and as I said, they go set up shop a block away, they find a donated location or a mosque, and they continue what they do, and they march down the street past dorms that are not strictly speaking on the campus property, whatever. They can continue to say what they want to say. They can show up to class and just one at a time say things to people in the classes as individuals that echo what they're saying in the protest. How is it any different? Until their lies are called out and we stop being afraid of them and the prospect of violence. If they get violent, then we can do something. And I'm not saying let them get violent, like, let's do it. Let's court violence. I'm saying they only can do what they do because they lie and we don't speak up and tell the truth again and again and again and again. So they either have to get violent, in which case they show their, you know what, or they lose because their ideas are morally bankrupt and incorrect. The simplest and most accessible key to our self-neglected liberation is this: personal non-participation in lies. Though lies may conceal everything, though lies may control everything, we should be obstinate about this one small point. Let them be in control, but without any help from us. This opens a breach in the imaginary encirclement caused by our inaction. It is the easiest thing for us to do and the most destructive for the lies. Because when people renounce lies, it cuts short their existence like a virus. They can survive only in a living organism. When we ban these organizations, we make it look like we are lying about freedom and civil liberties. We are hypocrites. We are not refusing to participate in the lie. We add a new one. Let us admit it. We have not matured enough to march into the squares and shout the truth out loud or to express aloud what we think. It is not necessary. It is dangerous. Now, it is not dangerous for you. It isn't. In most instances, it's not. But that said, if you feel like it is, you can do what he's suggesting now. But let us refuse to say what we do not think. This is our path, the easiest and the most accessible one, which allows for our inherent, well rooted cowardice. And it is much easier, it is shocking even to say this, than the sort of civil disobedience that Gandhi advocated, or that we have even seen SJP demonstrate. You not participating in a lie is, that we're a free country, but ban this organization. You refusing to go down that path, look what they're doing. They're out in the streets. I'm not saying, "Oh, kudos to them." I'm just saying that's how far they have to go to make you look like a liar, and you're letting them if you ban them. Our path is not that of giving conscious support to lies about anything at all, and once we realize that where the perimeters of falsehood are, everyone sees them in his own way. Our path is to walk away from this gangrenous boundary. If we do not paste together the dead bones and scales of ideology, if we did not sew together rotting rags, we would be astonished how quickly the lies would be rendered helpless and would subside. That which should be naked would then really appear naked before the whole world. A man cannot be a woman cannot be a man. Keep saying it. No, I will not use pronouns that do not fit the person I'm speaking to by coercion. Won't do it. Things of that nature. So in our timidity, let us each make a choice whether to remain consciously a servant of falsehood. Of course, it is not out of inclination, but to feed one's family that one raises one's children in the spirit of lies. Please don't do that. You're not there yet. You don't live in Soviet Russia. So I do hear some of you saying, but you're not Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Or to shrug off the lies and become an honest man worthy of respect from one's children and contemporaries. And from that day onward, he will not sign, write, or print in any way a single phrase which in his opinion distorts the truth, will utter such a phrase neither in private conversation nor in public, neither on his own behalf nor at the prompting of someone else, neither in the role of agitator, teacher, educator, nor as an actor, will not depict, foster, or broadcast a single idea in which he can see a distortion of the truth, whether it be in a painting, sculpture, photography, technical science, or music. AI personae, anyone? Will not cite out of context, either orally or in writing, a single quotation to please someone, to feather his own nest, to achieve success in his work, if he does not completely share the idea which is quoted, or if it does not accurately reflect the matter at issue. Will not allow himself to be compelled to attend demonstrations and meetings if they were contrary to his desires. The next DEI training at your work. Will immediately walk out of a meeting, session, lecture, performance, or film if he hears a speaker tell lies or purvey ideological nonsense or shameless propaganda. Will not subscribe to or buy a newspaper or magazine in which information is distorted and primary facts are concealed. That would be most of them. I have not enumerated, of course, all possible and necessary ways of avoiding lies, but whoever begins to cleanse himself will easily apply the cleansing pattern to other cases. It will not be the same for everybody at first. Some will lose their jobs. But there are no loopholes for anybody who wants to be honest. On any given day, any one of us, even those securely working in technical sciences, will be confronted with at least one of the above choices, either truth or falsehood, towards spiritual independence or towards spiritual servitude. And he who is not sufficiently courageous to defend his soul, don't let him be proud of his progressive views, and don't let him boast that he's an academician or a people's artist, a distinguished figure or a general. Let him say to himself, I am part of the herd and a coward. It's all the same to me as long as I'm fed and kept warm. And so if we're tempted, as I was, to support what Governor DeSantis was doing because, rah, I agree, that would put me in part of the herd too. And that is why I refuse to do it. Even this path, the most moderate of all paths of resistance, would not be easy for those of us who have become too set in our ways, but it would be far easier than a hunger strike or a self-immolation. The flames would not touch your body, your eye would not burst from the heat, and your family should always be able to get black bread and fresh water. This would not be an easy path, but the easiest of all possible ones. Not an easy path, but there are people amongst us, dozens of them, who have been observing all these conditions for years and who live by the truth. Therefore, you will not be the first to take this path. You will join others. It will be easier and shorter if we embark on it great embark on it in great and friendly numbers. If we are in thousands, it will not be possible for them to do anything to anyone. If we are in tens of thousands, we will not recognize our own country. Think back to COVID. How many more of us were there than the people telling us to stay home? How many more of us were there than the people telling us to put on a mask? How many more of us were there than the people telling us we would lose our jobs if we did not put something into our bodies that we did not want to put into our bodies? And it's rapid fire. We now know how right those of us who refused to lie and participate in the lie were. Everybody knows now. It did make a difference. The people who did speak up, whatever their losses were, brought us to knowing the truth sooner, I believe, than we would have. So you're in very good company. You're not alone. If we are too frightened, then we should stop complaining that we are being suffocated. We are doing this to ourselves. If we bow down even further and wait longer, our brothers, the biologists, may then help to bring nearer the day when our thoughts can be read and our genes restructured. Are we not close to that? If we are too frightened to do anything, then we are hopeless and worthless people, and the lines of Pushkin fit us well. What use to the herds the gifts of freedom, the scourge and a yoke with tinkling bells? This is their heritage, bequeathed to every generation. I don't know about you guys, but I personally do not want my children and my grandchildren to look back at our generation and say, why didn't they say anything? And now we're going to take a little trip down memory hole lane, and I'm going to show you how we got here. How do we get to a socialist system that we don't even recognize as such, that too many of us are desperate to argue isn't one? No, socialism's out there. We're in danger of becoming a socialist, but no, they didn't win. It's out there. Oh, this started with Obama. Oh, this started with Common Core. Oh, this started with in the 60s. I hear it all the time. Oh, it's been in the last 10 years. It's been in the last 30 years, but you're going to have to go back quite a bit farther. When people tell you who they are, you really should listen. This gentleman, George S. Counts, very influential in our education system, lived from 1889 to 1974. After study tours in the Soviet Union in 1927 and 1929, he published The Soviet Challenge to America, 1931. Impressed by Soviet efforts at social planning, he attributed the social and economic devastation of the Great Depression to the lack of planning in the United States. In 1932, Counts spoke before the Progressive Education Association and criticized the organization for not having a social theory to guide education. The controversial speech was later included in the pamphlet Dare the School Build a New Social Order, 1932, in which he called for schools and teachers to help foster a planned collective economy. He also argued that teachers should serve as leaders affecting social change. 1932. Edward Thorndike, born in 1874, lived through 1949. Thorndike reduced psychology to the study of observable, measurable human behavior with the complexity and mystery of mind and soul left out. He too was influential. He was an influencer on other people like Dewey and Counts, et cetera, and so forth. In summing up his theory of learning, Thorndike wrote, "The best way with children may often be, in the pompous words of an animal trainer, to arrange everything in connection with the trick, so that the animal will be compelled by the laws of its own nature to perform it." And this is a document from the NEF conferences from 1921 to 1938. What was the NEF? The NEF was a movement connecting lay enthusiasts for educational reform with major figures in the developing disciplines of psychology and education, such as Carl Gustav Jung, Jean Piaget, and John Dewey. Accounts of the conferences held in the 1920s reveal a strong commitment among the leaders of the NEF to the fostering of international understanding and a world consciousness through education and support for the League of Nations. So if you wonder why we're enthralled to the United Nations and UNESCO and their definition of education, this goes way, way back. The NEF's position on research and education and the need to bring together training into the academy and the teacher training, like we need to train teachers to be very specific agents of social change, was made explicit at the conferences. These involved Bureau of Education Research, which were financed by American foundations. And I can't see through my slide controls, unfortunately. Oh, wait, and the combination of the NEF's network with this money is considered. Okay. John Dewey, the man, not a great guy. No, very much a socialist through and through. He arrived on a train in New York to witness immigrants newly arrived in New York and was just so off-put by how dirty and foreign they were. And they speak all these different languages and they're so illiterate. And well, we have to get to work fixing that. The last stand of oligarchical and antisocial seclusion is perpetuation of this purely individualistic notion of intelligence, he said, 1935. I believe that the teacher's place and work in the school is to be interpreted from the same basis. The teacher is not in the school to impose certain ideas or to reform certain habits in the child, but is there as a member of the community to select the influences which shall affect the child and to assist him in properly responding to these influences, which is a long and fancy way of saying teach the child how to respond, teach the child what to think. Habits in the child would be what the child would go and do on their own. The conception of education as a social process and function has no definite meaning until we define the kind of society we have in mind. And of course, he and others did. Woodrow Wilson in particular, 1856 to 1924, we want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity in every society, of course, certainly, to forego the privileges of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks. This was a speech he gave to New York City School Teachers Association while president of Princeton University in 1909. And we know that he became president of the United States, founded the League of Nations, referenced before, the NEF, and then we have this. Elwood P. Cubberley, 1868 to 1941. Our schools are factories in which the raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned. And that is the business of the school, to build its pupils, to build its pupils according to the specifications laid down. This is in his book, Public School Administration, while chief of elementary texts at Houghton Mifflin in 1922. So public school, going way back, government schooling was about shaping and molding the children like a dog trainer, like an animal trainer, to behave in certain ways, to respond to certain stimuli, to produce the world that these progressive socialists wanted to produce. And this is Alexander Inglis. And I'm going to have to, one moment, I'm going to have to read up close from my book because that is too tiny for my old eyes. But Inglis broke down the purpose, the actual purpose of modern schooling into 6 basic functions, any one of which is enough to curl the hair of those innocent enough to believe the 3 traditional goals of education listed earlier in this book, Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto: to make good people, to make good citizens, to make each person his or her personal best. You probably hear these reasons to this day from your school district, that they're trying to make your children good people, to make them good citizens, and to make them each their personal best. Except that's not what it's for at all. Number 1, the adjustive or adaptive function. Schools are to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority. This, of course, precludes critical judgment completely. It also pretty much destroys the idea that useful or interesting materials should be taught, because you can't test for reflexive obedience until you know whether you can make kids learn and do foolish and boring things. Now, this is John Taylor Gatto's words, but these were the functions. These were Inglis's functions, the adjustive or adaptive function. The integrating function. This might well be called the conformity function because its intention is to make children as alike as possible. People who conform are predictable, and this is of great use to those who wish to harness and manipulate a large labor force. What do we have now with SEL? transformative SEL, school-wide SEL and data mining, and predictive technologies. What do they even tell you now in so many words they're trying to do? Predict what the student will do, predict what the student will be, predict, predict, predict. They're working on the same project with a higher degree of technology and more of your money than I'm sure Dewey ever dreamed he'd get his hands on, or Horace Mann, or Woodrow Wilson, or any of these other people. The diagnostic and directive function. School is meant to determine each student's proper social role. This is done by logging evidence mathematically, data mining, and anecdotally on cumulative records that the government holds on to for 70 years, by the way, as in your permanent record. So they can either define you literally by what classes they put you in or what schools they, allow you to go to, or just what they allow schools to be, or they can use all this data to determine at a distance what you can do in life, a la Chinese social credit system. The differentiating function. Once their social role has been diagnosed, children are to be sorted by role and trained only so far as their destination in the social machine merits, and not one step further. So much for making kids their personal best. Well, now with equity, what we're doing is to make sure that those who would be high flyers, tall poppies, independent thinkers, you name it, are cut down to proper size so they shouldn't aspire to being independent, unless, of course, the government wants to recruit them to do it for them, or some giant corporation wants to recruit them to do it for them. That's going to be coming too pretty soon. As soon as they get the algorithms worked out and figure out how to get these little geniuses to conform in their thoughts earlier to feel like they should apply their genius solely to the goals of the WEF or the SDGs or whatever, that is coming down the pike, I can assure you. The selective function. This refers not to human choice at all, but to Darwin's theory of natural selection as applied to what he called the favored races. So while they, jabber on about equity and diversity and inclusion, they're not uplifting any of these so-called less favored or marginalized races. Quite the contrary. Literacy rates are going down. They were going up a little bit for a little while, like this much. And they were certainly higher before the government got their hands on all the Black children in government schools, desegregated, bust-in schools. But they're going down, as are their math scores, as is their achievement in every realm. But they're still graduating. And then finally, the I'm not going to say this right. The propedeutic function. The societal system implied by these rules will require an elite group of caretakers. Sound familiar? WEF? Anyone? UNESCO? Anyone? People over Davos? Anyone? Okay. To that end, a small fraction of the kids will quietly be taught how to manage this continuing project, how to watch over and control the population, deliberately dumb down and declawed in order that government might proceed unchallenged and corporations might never want for obedient labor. And, these words were written solidly, I don't know, almost 50 years ago. He didn't know about SDG, UNESCO, any of that. Have we made any progress, or did they pretty much win and get to not only keep their socialist project, but expand it? And we were warned. We were absolutely warned. Again, Isabel Patterson, do you think nobody would willingly entrust his children to you or pay you for teaching them? Why do you have to extort your fees and collect your pupils by compulsion? Think about that. Why do they have to do that? If the schools were good, do we really believe parents wouldn't choose to send their children to them? Do we believe they wouldn't pay? People pay a lot for their houses and their cars and their medical care and their clothes and all kinds of things, their vacations. Do we really believe that parents would not fork over a decent amount of money for a solid education? Parents do it now. They do it now even with the taxes taken from them. They scrape and they save, or they double mortgage their homes for private school. They send, both parents go off to work to do it, even when it's at an extra expense. There can be no greater stretch of arbitrary power than is required to seize children from their parents, teach them whatever the authorities decree they shall be taught, and extrapolate from the parents the funds to pay for the procedure. Now, she was saying, look what she lived, 1886 to 1961. She was on the ball. She had a fight, which you can read about in Freedom's Furies, Timothy Sandefur. She had a fight with Herbert Hoover, whom she considered to be too socialist. He was. Most of us don't think of him that way because we think of him as a Republican. Oh, he wasn't a socialist. Guys, I hate to break this to you. The socialism knows no party in terms of the American system. Socialism is celebrated, applauded, upheld by the Republican Party too. Medicare Part D. We're not touching your Social Security, don't worry. I mean, I've not heard one coherent voice in the Republican Party arguing for the abolition of this system. Not one. They'll say, let's get rid of the Department of Education. That's nipping at the edges. She also said, no law can give power to private persons. Every law transfers power from private persons to government. Every single one. The power to do things for people is also the power to do things to people. That ban, as I said, can be used against other groups. If you hear some bad collectivist notions, chances are that they came from modern liberals or leftists, if you prefer. But if you hear or read something outrageously god-awfully collectivistic, you may be sure that the author is a conservative. I'm sorry, but I agree. Ayn Rand tried to warn us. She tried to teach us and warn us. Individual rights are the means of subordinating society to moral law. So, as I said before, if you're worried about morality, you safeguard individual rights. Absolutely safeguard them. Because when an individual steps out of line and aggresses against someone else in an immoral fashion, all the things we consider to be immoral, stealing, killing, drunk driving, whatever it is that you want to hold out to be immoral, that actually does affect you, that violates your rights, not just that exists somewhere. Oh, I don't like that someone's doing this. The government that protects your individual rights will protect you from that immoral person. How well are we protecting ourselves now from people who steal, from people who vandalize, from people who riot and flip over cars? We're not. And what has happened? You see people out there, they do those things, BLM, etc., or they just rob a store blind. What happens? The store shuts down. Because the rights of the property owners were not defended, now nobody has a drugstore in San Francisco. No more Walgreens. There's no more Nordstrom. They're gone. So now you have less freedom because those individuals were not held accountable. Your individual rights were not protected. And then, as I said, if the answer is we can't have any protests or any riots, any rallies or anything and no ideas, whatever, nobody can go anywhere. Nobody can do anything because somebody might be a BLM protester. No, the answer would have been to defend the property owners, to put the people who violated their rights in jail, to make them pay restitution to those people whose rights they violated. That's how you stop that. No man, every man is an end in himself. Do or do not. There is no try. No man or group may initiate the use of physical force against others, and the only proper purpose of government is to protect man's rights. She also said, oops, sorry, that was a double. A proper government is only a policeman acting as an agent of man's self-defense, and as such may resort to force only against those who start the use of force. Government that initiates the employment of force against men who had forced no one reverses its only moral purpose. I submit to you, this is what Ron DeSantis is at risk of doing. He is initiating the employment of force against these students who have not forced anyone to show up at their rallies, who have not forced anyone to take their toolkit, who have not forced anyone to even to listen to them. You say, well, they're yelling and they're screaming. Then get them on a noise ordinance. If they're truly causing that kind of a disturbance, and there is one to protect the ears, the literal right to hear class or whatever, get them on that. If they have committed a felony and you have evidence, get them on that. Not just because it's a law, but because there might be laws that protect individual liberties on the campus that they have violated. Go there. Don't come and make a blanket ban, and then now you've eliminated your moral high ground. When the framers of the American Republic spoke of the people, they meant a sum of individuals, each of whom retains his inviolate guarantee of individual rights. Under a proper social system, a private individual may do anything except that which is legally forbidden. A government official may do nothing except that which is legally permitted. Now, Ron DeSantis is legally permitted to do what he's doing because it's a socialist system. And only because of that. If he didn't have access to your money, he wouldn't control the school. This is the American concept of a government of laws and not of men. We are fast approaching the stage where the government is free to do anything it pleases while the citizens may act only by permission. And John Taylor Gatto himself, I read from his book, 1925 to 2018. Is there any idea more radical in the history of the human race than turning your children over to total strangers whom you know nothing about and having those strangers work on your child's mind out of your sight for a period of 12 years or 13 if you send them to kindergarten, or 17 if you send them to college? Could there be a more, if it's a public college and the government is behind it, for sure. Could there be a more radical idea than that? Back in colonial days in America, if you proposed that kind of idea, they'd burn you at the stake. You mad person, it's a mad idea. And in fact, when they did come for the final students in Massachusetts to compel them to go to the government school, they had to show up with guns because the parents were not letting their children go. They had to compel the children at gunpoint to the local school. Government schooling is the most radical adventure in history. It kills the family by monopolizing the best times of childhood and by teaching disrespect for home and parents. Does anyone debate that right now? Hannah Arendt, 1906, 1970 to 1975. The aim of totalitarian education has never been to instill convictions, but to destroy the capacity to form any. How many of our younger generation can just parrot? Again, one of the reasons they're attracted to groups like SJP is easy talking points, easy to sound like the good guy. Palestine will be free. Free sounds good. Oh, you're oppressed? Let me join you. They don't have the ability to form any kind of convictions of their own. They can only attach to the ones that either sound good to their naive ears or that get them social cred, get them something from the collective that they now understand full well, thanks to the 6 points of education, is the purpose of their education, to get that credit, that social credit. That's what they're there to get. The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convicted Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. Politically, the weakness of the argument has always been that those who choose the lesser evil forget very quickly that they chose evil. So when you're saying, but Deb, this is what we have. This is what we have to deal with. It is a state system. So we have to work within the system and we have to ban it because it's bad and dangerous and they could cause problems and kids are being scared and kids are intimidated and SJP is a terrible organization and they're providing moral support to a horrible terrorist group. And so therefore they must be banned. Not brought up on charges when they commit acts of violence, not, sued by those who have been actually violated by people motivated by their activity. No, none of that. We need to ban them because this is what we've got. We're in a socialist system. It's how it is. Just understand that's what you're doing. You don't get to weasel out of it. You don't get to deny that you are, in fact, a socialist. You can say, well, social, no, I'm not really not, because I really don't agree with it. I would get rid of it if I could. Alexander Solzhenitsyn told you, you don't have to get rid of it to not be part of it. Don't participate. Don't participate in the lie. Call it what it is again and again and again. Champion true liberty every chance you get. Embolden other people. Carry the torch for these people I've just read from. And I've already read hers. I don't know why these are coming up again and again. I'm sorry. Okay. Schools were designed by Horace Mann and Barnard Sears and Harper of the University of Chicago and Thorndike of Columbia Teachers College and some other men to be instruments of the scientific management of a mass population. Schools are intended to produce, through the application of formulae, formulaic human beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. We know that that's what they're doing. Government schooling is the most radical adventure in history. I already said that. Anyone who's more interested in human beings than the rules is a threat to the system. That's why you get pushback at school board meetings. You are a threat to the system because you're actually interested in the human beings in their care, not the rules that they're trying to maintain. Edmund Burke, all that is necessary for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing, as they must if they believe they can do nothing, if they believe they can do nothing. So if you believe there's nothing you can do, you will do nothing, and evil will triumph. SJP is as powerful as it is on campus because people are afraid. Make them stop. Go out there with better ideas. Don't be intimidated. Refuse to be intimidated. And I'm not saying protest on the campus walk. I'm saying empower your students, your kids, to go into their classrooms and tell the truth when professors spew lies at them. Tell them to refuse to take classes with professors who spew lies. Tell them not to go to state-run universities in the first place. Don't take loans. Don't participate. And if you can't afford to go, work your way through. Take 6 years. Take 8 years if you simply must go to college for whatever reason. And if you mustn't, don't. There is nothing worse because the counsel of despair is declaration of irresponsibility. It is Pilate washing his hands. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could do only a little. And this is from my own dear husband, Carl Carter. A battle of ideas that does not stay in the realm of ideas will become a battle for your life. So if you don't like the ideas, fight them with better ideas. If you don't, if you employ the government to fight on your behalf, not because your rights have been violated, but because you're afraid they might be, or because you don't like the ideas that someone else is speaking using the freedom you'd like to retain for yourself, eventually it will be a battle for your life. And I am here to tell you that the left, people like SJP, they have won. They look how powerful they are. They're so powerful you genuinely don't think there's anything else you can do but ask the government to give you a voucher, to give you a little credit account of taxpayer money to go to another school, a private school, this is school, that, where there's no difference. There really isn't, because the teachers are all educated in the teacher colleges defined by the government what they have to learn. The universities at this point all get federal and state funding. The very, very few truly private schools. And chances are your teachers didn't attend them. And if they borrowed money to go to school, that too was from the government. So where are you going to go? And how many different places are you going to move your child in this socialist system thinking you're doing something better than you could do simply by not participating? So that is why I had to reluctantly admit that I did not support Governor DeSantis's decision to ban SJP on Florida campuses. I think it ends up being a win for collectivists, tribalists, socialists, everywhere. It's a win. Look what we did. We got a free people to censor free speech. That's a win if you're a Marxist. We empowered the state government. We set a precedent for the state government to clamp down on political groups on campus they don't like. Now all we have to do is get someone elected who'll do the same to the groups we don't like. And suddenly you wake up one day and you're a domestic terrorist, according to your Justice Department, because the people elected in your state to run your schools or run your school board are all socialists. And you're questioning their authority. That's a no-no. So the only way they have that power is because of the socialist system. Don't play in their sandbox. Live not by lies. And I guess the last thing I will show you, I'll make a plug, I suppose, because you might be thinking at this point, great, Deb. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. You've just depressed the heck out of me. I don't know what I'm gonna do come election time. Who am I gonna vote for? If they're all socialists, et cetera. Well, at least in primaries, there's somebody you could vote for, and that is Jacob Hornberger. Yes, he's a libertarian, and I'm no friend of the Libertarian Party at the moment, especially the Mises Caucus. But as a candidate, this is the only person I can endorse who represents everything I just told you to do, everything I told you to support. I say separation of school and state, but really you got to go all the way, separate economy and state, and it becomes a moot point. But this is his organization, the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is Jacob Hornberger. He is running for president. Obviously, he doesn't have his party's nomination yet. If you are not satisfied with the candidates you have, I strongly encourage you to take a look at him. If you want actual liberty, education or otherwise, I strongly encourage you to take a look at him because you're going to have to get serious. You're going to have to get committed sooner than later, guys, because it's education now. It's already gone. We've seen what's happened in medicine. We've seen what's happening to law. It's like dominoes. And what you read from Solzhenitsyn is going to be your life, or at least your children's lives. If you don't do the hard thing now and risk losing the election to stand on principle. We got here because we were more afraid of losing elections than losing our freedom. You can't. We've done that for all those years. Every time a Republican was up, there was Reagan. And I could point you to education policies that he made that also put us on this path. He did not do education any favors, I'm sorry to say. And I was a Reagan voter. But every single Republican from Teddy Roosevelt forward, every single one, maybe Calvin Coolidge, not so much, but progressives, down with the socialism light, unwilling to stand up for true liberty, 100% participated in this. They just, kind of nipped at the end. We'll lower taxes. But if all you can do is lower taxes, you're keeping the system in place that's dependent on the taxes, and it is the problem. And then when you lose an election and the taxes go back up, what have you done? What have you done? You've done nothing. You've not increased liberty. Not one iota. All you've done is legitimize the taking of freedom over and over again. And your moral high ground is now a divot. So that is why I don't dislike Ron DeSantis. I've met Ron DeSantis. He seems like a lovely man. His wife too. Very nice people. I don't think they mean any harm to anyone. But this kind of evil is not done by evil people necessarily. It's very, very often done by very good and well-intentioned people who either don't see the principle, don't have the core principles, or they're too afraid to risk losing something to stand on them. So I thank you so very much for listening, for being present at the show. And I hope you will like and share this broadcast with others. So hopefully they can give it some serious thought themselves. Have a great night, you guys. I really appreciate you.